Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Green Lease Leaders, Using the Lease to Drive Clean Energy Innovation, Health and Wellness, and Better Tenant Engagement. My name is Chris Potter. I am IMT's Communications Manager. Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. All of the attendee lines are muted to minimize audio interference, so if you have any questions, please submit them through the questions bar on the webinar control panel that you have in front of you, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the moderated Q&A portion at the end of the discussion. We'll be logging these questions, so if we don't get to yours during the Q&A, we'll be sure to follow up with you as soon as we can via email after the webinar presentation. Lastly, today's webinar will be recorded and all attendees will receive a link to that recording through GoToWebinar along with a hyperlink to a PDF of the slide presentations. We'll also be sharing the presentation on IMT's YouTube channel at youtube.com/IMTvid, where you can subscribe and view several of IMT's past webinars. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to our moderator, Alexandra Harry. Alex is IMT's program manager for private sector engagement, and she will get things started and introduce today's speakers who we're very excited to have join us. So Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about Green Lease Leaders. So the big objective is that I hope everyone has a foundational understanding of what green leasing is. And then we're going to expand the conversation to talk about what does the recognition look like for those who are including best practices of energy aligned or sustainability aligned language in the lease. And then we'll hear from a few in the field who are actually working diligently to include this information in their leases. So for today, I will be your host, and I'm also co-hosting with Cindy Zhu with the U.S. Department of Energy. Cindy will give an overview of what green leasing is, and then some of the programs that are available at the Department of Energy, such as Better Buildings. We have two great guest speakers who are going to share their best practices for green leasing and why it's important for their corporations to pursue green lease leaders. So we'll have Jessica Long from JBG Smith giving a great overview of her organization's approach to green leasing. And then Sarah Neff with Kilroy Realty Corporation will also talk about her approach and her unique strategy for tenant engagement. So with that, I will kick it off to Cindy.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today to hear about the Green Lease Leaders program. Again, I'm Cindy Zhu from the U.S. Department of Energy's Building Technologies Office. Next slide, please. I'll start off by reminding everyone that Green Lease Leaders is actually part of a larger national recognition program that the DOE leads called the Better Buildings Initiative. Since 2011, Better Buildings has partnered with building owners and operators across the country to set energy reduction goals across their building portfolios, track progress, and share successes. Better Buildings partners now cover 13% of the U.S. commercial landscape and 12% of the U.S. manufacturing energy footprint. If you're a building owner or operator who's interested in learning more about this program, please reach out to me after this webinar. Next slide, please. So commercial buildings use 20% of the nation's total energy consumption, and tenant spaces account for 50% of that portion. Today, we will discuss how green leasing can be used to tackle persistent barriers to achieving energy efficiency in tenant spaces. Through a green lease, tenants and landlords are able to, 1, know how much energy their buildings and spaces are using, 2, pay for energy upgrades commensurate to the financial benefits that each party will receive, and 3, realize savings from cost-effective maintenance and behavioral energy best practices that they undertake. Next. So what is a green lease? Also known as an energy-aligned lease, green leases equitably align the costs and benefits of energy and water efficiency investments between a landlord and a tenant. In the two examples shown on this image, On the left, the landlord installs high-efficiency rooftop units to the building, and the tenant pays the incremental upcharge on their rent. The tenant will ultimately use less energy to heat and cool their space, ultimately paying lower utility bills over the life of their lease. On the right side, the landlord also installs solar panels on the rooftop, which the tenant purchases energy directly from the landlord. The tenant pays lower utility bills and also reduces their carbon footprint. Next slide. There are numerous financial and additional benefits to green leasing. Research has shown that enacting a green lease can reduce utility bills up to 51 cents per square foot. Lowering utility bills will increase net operating incomes for both the landlord and the tenant, as it reduces the occupancy cost to the building. Energy efficiency has also been shown to increase comfort in spaces, increasing workforce satisfaction and also improving communication between the landlord and the tenant. Next slide. If you are a building owner, operator, or tenant looking for information about how to design and operate an energy-efficient, high-performing space, head over to the Better Building Solution Center, our one-stop shop for proven building case studies, organizational strategies, technology guidances, and more. You can search by your energy efficiency barrier, technology or topic, sector, and geographical location. Now I'll hand it back over to Alex to introduce the Green Lease Leaders program.
Thanks, Cindy. And to keep things moving, now that you guys have a baseline understanding of what green leasing is, my talk will talk about how you can get recognition for your efforts. So just to level set a little bit, I'm with the Institute for Market Transformation. I run Green Lease Leaders in partnership with the Department of Energy. My organization, we're an energy efficiency nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is really to create sustained demand for high-performing buildings. So we really want to take an understanding of what the private and public sectors are doing around energy efficiency best practices and disseminate those best practices to lead to market transformation. So as I said before, IMT and DOE has been in partnership running the recognition program for Green Lease Leaders. So this is a program that focuses and recognizes tenants, owners, brokers, architects, lawyers for their efforts to add energy-aligned language to their lease. The program started in 2014, and it is now, it's just wrapped up its 2018 year, which was also the largest class we had this year. So just to give you guys a little bit of perspective on how big Green Lease Leaders has become since 2014 and how we've built on that momentum, we now have almost 60 individual companies recognized as a Green Lease Leader. And as I said before, 2018 had the largest class, and you'll hear from Jessica and Sarah with JBG Smith and Kilroy respectively. They were in 2018's Green Lease Leaders class. So here are some of the latest leaders that were recognized earlier this year at the BOMA convention. So it was really great to have 23 companies recognized this year, and some are repeat leaders, and you'll hear from our guest speakers today on why the recognition was of value to them. So next I want to segue into what it takes to become a Green Lease Leader. I think that's one of the key things that a lot of folks are here to listen in on today, and I hope that all of you, if you're thinking about it, reach out to us to get tips on how to apply. So for 2018, we actually added some new enhancements to Green Lease Leaders. The biggest one was we aligned some of the criteria with Energy Star for tenant space. So we wanted to make sure that since the pilot was out, that some of the new requirements for that recognition were aligned with Green Lease Leaders. And there are now 2 levels of recognition. There's a silver level and a gold level. I'll go into more detail about that. We've also standardized more opportunities to achieve Green Lease Leaders recognition. So there are now prerequisites and credits, and there are some opportunities for you to pick and choose which ones are more applicable to your portfolio. And the other big updates that we had, we updated the website. We included reference guides that kind of walk you through what the levels of recognition are and how to meet the credit requirements. And there's also an online lease assessment tool, and you can fill out the application through our online portal. And all of this is available on greenleaseleaders.com. So to get into the nuts and bolts of what it takes to become a Green Lease Leader, I mentioned that there's two levels of recognition. The first one is silver. Silver means that you've met the requirements for, you met 2 prerequisites and at least 5 credits, and you've documented that you've met the prerequisites and credits either through a standard form lease or a corporate document. The big caveat here is that you don't have to have an executed lease to achieve silver level. When you're moving into gold, you actually do have to have at least one lease executed showing that you have implemented the language into a lease. And then gold level, folks that are recognized under the gold level are able to get a case study out of becoming a gold member. And so that way you can kind of showcase your organization's efforts with green leasing to your peers. So just to summarize, silver is kind of that foundational level. It's showing that you're taking steps to include that information in the lease. Gold is showing that you've actually implemented those items into the lease and you move forward with an execution. So just to highlight what some of the requirements are, as I said before, there are actually 3 track levels. So you can apply as a tenant, you can apply as a landlord, and then the third category is the team transaction. Team transaction involves typically a landlord and a tenant, and then a third party. So it could be a broker, a property manager, and an architect. So for today, I will talk about the unique requirements for a tenant and the unique requirements for a landlord. As I said before, for each recognition, you have to meet at least 2 prerequisites. And the first prerequisite is that you identify a sustainability or energy contact in the lease. And then for tenants, they have that added requirement of aligning their lease to meet the requirements for Energy Star tenant space. So those requirements are listed there. They involve estimating energy use, metering tenant energy use, lighting efficiently, sharing utility data with the landlord, and purchasing efficient equipment. And for the credits, there are, I believe, 10 credits here, and you have to choose at least 5. And some of them involve submetering your space or sharing that information, your utility data, with your landlord. Others involve a cost recovery clause, accepting that cost recovery clause for a landlord to pass those costs on to you. Others include demonstrating innovation in leasing, so that's kind of if some of these credits don't necessarily apply with what you're doing, if you're doing something else that's related to energy efficiency, you can also get credit for that. On the flip side, for landlords, it's also very similar to the tenant requirements. The prerequisite, again, requires you to identify a sustainability or energy efficiency contact so that tenants can contact someone for more information on sustainability. And the other prerequisite is that you implement a cost recovery clause in your lease so that you can pass through some of those capital improvements to your tenants. And then on the other side, for credits, you choose at least 5 of them. Similar to the tenant ones, there are ones related to tracking common area energy and water usage and energy data disclosure. And then there's also opportunities to educate your brokers about energy efficiency. And then there's another credit about implementing energy efficiency best practices in your lease. And to summarize, you might wonder what some of this year's class of Green Lease Leaders have been up to. And I will talk about a few of the organizations that have been recognized in 2018 and how they're using the lease to achieve certain corporate goals. The first one is the tower companies. They are a repeat Green Lease Leader. For this year's application, their big focus was aligning their lease to meet their Fitwel certification for a multifamily building. Morgan Creek and Rocky Mountain Institute, they were a team transaction recognized leader this year. They actually used the lease to maintain a successful net zero building operations. Kimco Realty Corporation, they applied as a landlord, and they used the lease to standardize a way to implement submeters into tenant spaces. All three of these studies are featured in case studies that you can have a chance to read. So if you look at greenleaseleaders.com/resources, you can read more about these three leaders and more on our website. So if you're looking to do a deep dive into what the specific requirements are for Green Lease Leaders, we do have two reference guides, one for landlords and one for tenants. And so it goes into more specific details on what the prerequisites are and what the credits are. There's also examples of lease clauses in there if you want to get a sample, you want to take a peek on what the language looks like. There's FAQs, there's links to case studies, and there's also example corporate guidelines. And again, this is all available on the greenleaseleaders.com website. So I'll leave you with the two biggest resources. If you're looking for more information on green leasing, you can check out greenleaseleaders.com. That's our one-stop shop for case studies, lease language, and webinars and more. And then again, if you're looking to apply or you want to learn more about what the leaders are up to, greenleaseleaders.com is where to start. So if you all are willing and able and you want to take the next step, applications to apply to become a Green Lease Leader in 2019 are due at the end of March. And the 2019 leaders will be announced at the June BOMA convention in Salt Lake City. If you're looking for more hands-on guidance, please feel free to contact me, alex.harry@imt.org or imtweb@imt.org. So I hope that you all have a understanding of what it takes to become a Green Lease Leader. I'll now pass it on to Jessica to talk about JBG's approach to green leasing.
Hi, everyone. This is Jessica Long. I'm the Director of Sustainability for JBG Smith. You can go to the next slide. Alex. Okay. We are, am I controlling the slides? Sorry. We are a real estate investment trust based in Washington, D.C. We own, operate, and develop over 19 million square feet of operating assets and 19 million square feet of development pipeline in transit-oriented urban infill development. So we really have a focus on placemaking and creating live, work, play environments, and a big part of that is our leasing practices. Next slide. So our sustainability program is looking at environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG, which are a priority for stakeholders across our organization. So clearly we're here to talk about tenants today, but we're also seeing our local jurisdictions focused on carbon reduction and climate adaptation strategies. Our investors are largely looking for more ESG information in order to adequately look at the long-term sustainability of our business. And then our employees are also looking at we're focused on what's important to the next generation of our workforce and how we can attract top talent to the organization. So the way we are looking at it is that our tenants are facing the same pressures that we're facing from investors and employees and customers wanting to stay on top of these issues. So thinking about green leasing in the way that we can bring that benefit to our tenants the same way that we're looking at our company's strategy. So next slide. As I mentioned, our local jurisdictions here in the Washington, D.C. area have aggressive plans for carbon reduction and climate adaptation, and they're really looking to building owners and developers to help meet those climate goals. So the Sustainable D.C. plan, for example, has two aspects. They have the Climate Ready D.C. plan and the Clean Energy D.C. plan, which looks to reduce the carbon emissions from the city by requiring renewable energy to be procured from renewable sources, and also for new buildings to achieve net zero certification and reduce energy use across the building stock. So again, the lease and our interaction with our tenants are a large part of how we're going to be able to achieve these shared goals with our jurisdictions. Next slide. Institutional investors are focused on this issue. Largely, the large institutional investors are managing retirement funds, and they're looking at the long-term sustainability of our portfolio. So how are we managing our sustainability impacts is a big piece of how they're looking at their investment decisions. Next slide. So GRESB is a tool that we use for benchmarking our performance in ESG factors. We were excited that this year, being our first year as a public REIT and participating in the GRESB assessment, we were able to earn 4 stars out of 5 and be ranked second in our peer group, which is diversified office residential portfolios. So looking at the chart on the right, you can see that a large portion of the participants in the GRESB survey are really high performing, concentrated in that top right quartile. So focused on management and policy and implementation and measurement. The lease and the implementation of the Green Lease Leaders requirements is a large part of the high performance program that we've implemented. So next slide. So talking a little bit more about what investors are looking for, our investors are looking to us to disclose material information on our sustainability program. So the SASB standard was recently released, and I know Sarah can talk to this a little bit more because she's further along than us. But what we've done is we've really made an internal commitment to measuring and managing the sustainability aspects that are material to our business. So SASB program outlines the topics that are most important to the real estate industry, and those being energy management, water management, manage of tenant sustainability impacts is what we're here to talk about today, and climate change adaptation. So the fact that management of tenant sustainability impacts is on this list really shows that what the Green Lease Leaders program is doing and the aspects that we're looking at are really important to the long-term sustainability of our company and how that's measured by our investors. So as you can see, the sustainability disclosure topics and accounting metrics for the tenant sustainability impacts include the cost recovery clause, having separately metered tenants, and then really the approach that your company takes to measuring, incentivizing, and improving sustainability impacts of tenants. And that's going to mean different things to different companies. So depending on what your tenant base looks like, your approach to how you work with them is going to be different. So every company is going to have their own recipe for how they want to interact with their tenants. And I think that's an important thing to understand, that there's no kind of one size fits all approach to green leasing and tenant engagement. Next slide. So our internal structure for managing sustainability, it really looks at a top-down integrated approach. So what we've done is we've recently, our board has approved oversight of environmental, social factors, and our sustainability team works directly with executive leadership to develop strategy and then implement that, develop an implementation plan that can be rolled out to asset teams. The sustainability department is not the ones interacting with the tenants, signing the leases, doing the tours. We have a whole team of people that are all responsible for the implementation of our sustainability program. So our program is really revolved around integrating with their standard processes, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Next slide. So certifications and energy ratings is a big part of the green leasing process. So getting LEED and Energy Star certified is that what I see as a verification of your program. So you can put all of the best practices in place, but by getting certified, you have a third party that can verify what you are saying and what you're able to do. So this is just some high-level stats of how we're really prioritizing certification across our portfolio in order to support our larger goals of green leasing and tenant engagement. Next slide. So this is our green leasing playbook, as we call it. And what this is really the tool that we've provided to our leasing teams to integrate sustainability in the standard lease process. We've outlined each of the steps along the life cycle of a lease, from browsing buildings online all the way to occupancy, and understanding at each one of those milestones, what are the key things that our teams can do to ensure that sustainability is part of the conversation. The earlier that we can talk about sustainability, the better outcome we're going to have. First being trying to attract those top level tenants. We really see sustainability as a way of setting our buildings apart. And then as we move through the leasing process, understanding what our tenants' needs are and how that aligns with our goals and what our buildings have to offer. One of the important things that, comes early in the process, kind of in the third step down around the test fit and letter of intent, we've really pushed our leasing brokers to identify the tenant's sustainability needs. Are they going to be wanting to go for LEED commercial interior certification? Do they have health and wellness goals for their employees? Those are things that we want to understand early in the leasing process so that we can fit the deal to match the specific tenant needs, and that we're not being blindsided down the road when we say, oh, well, this tenant wants to go for LEED Platinum certification in their space, and we're kind of, as the sustainability team, like, well, I wish you hadn't promised that. So we can have those conversations early and make sure that everyone's on the same page on what we're trying to achieve here. And then I think, beyond the kind of lease signing, the TI and design and construction is a big part of it. We have internal construction management teams, and then a lot of tenants choose to use their own third-party construction management. So making sure that, again, everyone's on the same page on what are our requirements for sustainability and how are we executing and meeting everyone's needs. And then when you the transfer between the kind of leasing and construction team to the property management team is also an important time that we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about the building's ongoing sustainability programs now that they've come online, and what resources are we providing to ensure that their move-in and their ongoing operations in the space are sustainable. Next slide. So in order to facilitate each of those steps, we have several resources that we're providing to our teams. And we really outline, what are these tools and when is the right time to use them. One of the things that we're recognizing is that a lot of our teams, they have, and brokers in general, are all going to have a different approach to how they talk to tenants and how they approach a tour or a presentation. So we want to make sure that we're providing tools and resources to our brokers that allow them to, maintain their strategy for how they like to talk to tenants and incorporate sustainability. So again, there's no one size fits all. Everyone's going to take this and fit it into their standard processes. So next slide. So going through some of these resources, we've developed a building scorecard that can really just demonstrate the certification status of the building, the benefits of being in a green building. As I mentioned, we're a transit-oriented developer, so 98% of our assets are located around metro stations. So really this walk score, transit score, bike score section is important for us to highlight that that's a benefit of being in one of our buildings, and really what does that mean to the tenants. And then the third or fourth line down, really identifying what are the sustainability programs we can find in the building, and then just at the bottom a few highlights about our company and why, showing that as a corporate priority, sustainability is a corporate priority. So you'll see the Better Buildings Challenge and Green Lease Leaders here, and then just highlighting that our employees hold green certifications that that help us, discuss and engage with tenants on sustainability. Next slide. So our tenant fit out and leasing guidelines is actually a document that was developed by IMT with assistance from some of the input from some of the sustainability directors around the DC region. We worked with them to develop a template for a tenant fit out guideline, and then we actually were able to customize this and brand it for our own use. So this is a document that's available to our tenants. We encourage our leasing agents to share it with tenants early in the process, and then throughout the life of the leasing process, our construction team to continue to follow the suggestions in this document, recommending for tenants how they can prioritize efficiency in the design and construction of their space. So next slide. Fitwell is a program focused on health and wellness, and this is another resource that we have provided to our leasing agents to let them know that, this is something that we're focused on. We have a few buildings that are piloting this program, And we hope that through, engaging with tenants around health and wellness education, we'll be able to expand the program and really help take sustainability to the next level with health and wellness. So what the resource that we provides some information on the Fitwell program, the benefits of working in a healthy building, and then in the middle here, some wellness design considerations for tenants to think about when they're designing their space. Next slide. And then the jbgsgreen.com is a tenant-focused website that we've launched that provides tips, resources, tools for our tenants, and it's a public website, so anybody can benefit from the information found on the website. We use this to electronically share information with our tenants. One of the main things we try and do is be sustainable in the way that we're delivering information to our tenants. So having this web-based tool that we can post information and tips and resources outside of our typical tenant handbooks. This gives us the ability to have all of our sustainability information in one place, and then each of the individual building tenant handbooks actually can then link to this main sustainability site, kind of helping us manage the flow of information around sustainability. Next slide has some more information. So these are just a couple screenshots from the website. One of the things that, we thought was really important is just to continue to reiterate why should our tenants care about sustainability, reminding them that, being in a green building has benefits to not just lowering energy expenses, but productivity of their employees and the health and wellness of the overall company. So, and then here's the menu, just really looking at the office specific, having lots of resources where they can go in and click through and find different resources, including the Sustainable Leasing and Tenant Fit-Out Guide, and some tips around energy, water, waste, and other programs that we have in place. Next slide. That's it. So that's, in general, our program. Really, what our green leasing program is focused on taking all of the aspects of our overall sustainability program and making sure that we're highlighting those with our tenants and potential tenants throughout the life of the lease. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Jessica. That was a really great overview of all the great things that JBG Smith is doing. Next, I would like to hear from Sarah and Kilroy's approach to green leasing.
Hi, this is Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Kilroy. We're very proud to have earned 3 Green Lease Leaders awards. The first one was part of the inaugural class in 2014, and then again with the Team Transaction Awards in 2016, and then we were really proud at BOMA this year to earn Green Lease Leaders recognition at the newly created Gold level. So Jessica provided an absolutely fantastic overview of everything that goes into green leasing. I'm going to be getting a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what is in our leases and what I've learned through that process, and some advice for those thinking of implementing. So next slide. So the heart of every green lease, and this is why it's a prerequisite, is the ability for landlords to be able to do efficiency investments in the building and recover those capital investments over a payback period. So this is the one thing I actually can't take credit for in Kilroy's lease. This was something I inherited when I got here. But with today's efficiency technology, it's really critical. I mean, an LED can last for the lifetime, can be 15 years. but the tenant will have probably long since moved out by then. So it's really critical to be able to recover that over the payback period. And that is in every standard Kilroy lease without exception. And I'll get more into the importance of standardization later. Next. The next thing is building standards. So all of our leases point to our building standards. And this is really where the really details get in. We get into those for green leasing. Things like you have to put in Energy Star equipment, do an energy model if your space is over a certain size, that kind of thing. And I really find that putting a lot of the really specific requirements into the building standards document is a way better idea, because then you don't have to deal with sort of lawyers not understanding what these equipment requirements are, and they tend to strike them so that they won't interrupt deal flow. And so unless I find it's really much better to try to keep it really high level in the lease itself, and then get really into the details within the building standards document, which is pointed to in the lease. Next. The next thing is submetering. This is an important part of green leases. It's something that isn't consistent throughout the Kilroy portfolio. Some tenants have submetering, some don't. A lot of that is just dependent on how the buildings are electrically wired. So for those of you who are on this call who think, oh my goodness, I have a lot of old buildings, it's just spaghetti in there for wiring, this is impossible. It's okay. You can still have a green lease if it's not submetered, but it is a really good best practice. The other thing I want to mention that I have learned in trying to put in submeter language is that don't worry if the tenant happens to be a high user. I find that the tenants that really want submetering and are receptive when I ask that to go in the leases are these large tech tenants that are much more likely to be financially harmed by not paying a pro rata portion of the building, because those tenants want to do the right thing and be able to manage their own energy. And so don't be afraid to ask, even if you think the tenant might do better from an operation expense perspective with a pro rata share. Next. The next is green cleaning and recycling. One of the things, and I'll get into this in my little advice section at the end, is that you want to put some things in the lease that nobody's really going to disagree with, like tenant acknowledges that landlord has a green cleaning program. Nobody ever strikes that. And that's important, because then when you get in that same paragraph into the importance of recycling, you're able to give it a little bit more teeth. In our case, keeping with the, for some reason, spaghetti-themed nature of my talk today, we have the ability to find specific tenants and not the entire building in a multi-tenant building for recycling contamination violations. So we had a tenant that for some reason had like a spaghetti party every Wednesday night. Like, that sounds delightful, and why haven't I been invited? But they would throw all of their leftovers onto like the beautiful like office paper recycling and contaminate all of it. And our lease allowed us to identify which tenant that was and make them specifically pay for the contamination charges rather than the entire building. Next. A really critical part of the lease is disclosure of utility consumption. Jessica did a fantastic job of this, so I don't need to go through it. But basically, like, we really, really need the energy and water and waste consumption of our tenants, because it gets used in so many different ways. Kilroy was one of the first companies to put the standardized utility disclosure information into our annual financial report, into our 10K aligned with SASB. But it's not just what is, audited and investor facing. It's all these other sort of disclosures into Energy Star, CDP, Dow Jones, and obviously our sustainability report, which is audited. So that's really, really critical. This is also, I'm going to explain later about what to do about pushback. This is the one thing I have found tenants push back the most on, or at least the brokers do. And that's because it just seems like a pain. And so it has taken, this is the thing that's taken me the most education to keep in our leases, but now my teams are comfortable with why we need it. Next. And the last thing is contact information. So as was mentioned much earlier in this presentation, one of the prerequisites for the new gold level of recognition was putting your contact information in your leases. This is something we didn't have, but we recognized IMT's leadership and we thought it was a good idea. And so last year we threw my contact info into every single lease. Again, that took another round of education with our legal team and our brokers, but everybody was okay with it. And so the reason I put this in here is, yes, we do this but B, leases are evolving. Like we may have earned Green Lease Leaders recognition to the gold level back in 2014, but our leases have evolved a lot since then. Back then, when we started, I didn't even put that tenants had to comply with certifications, and then now they do. So, you know, if we're doing a LEED certification, Energy Star, we have a lot of Fitwel buildings as well. Tenants are required to participate. It doesn't mean they have to necessarily pay for it. We often split those costs, but they do have to do things like fill out surveys and allow us into our spaces when we need them to. Next. And one of the things I want to highlight, and Jessica does a fantastic job of this as well, is how important it is to engage your brokers. So we do a summer Twitter campaign around sustainability every year, highlighting a group that does a lot for sustainability. One year is our engineers, asset managers, our tenants. This year we focus on our brokers. And we really want to recognize the brokers that get green leases signed in our portfolio. And so we did this campaign over the whole summer, highlighting their deals and deal size. And this was really, really popular. I feel like brokers often, you know, they need to get their deals done. It's really tough to get stuff over the finish line, and anything that's going to screw that up is really terrifying. And so really highlighting that work, I think, is really important. This campaign was really popular. We had brokers who were like telling their family members to retweet it. People were really, really excited. And recognizing your brokers is never a bad idea. You guys may be shocked to learn that no broker who I requested to be included in this campaign said no. I think that that's a group that really could use some recognition as well, because this additional stuff we're asking them to do is hard. Next. And as a result of sort of all this work, we saw this picture earlier, but we were really, really excited to be able to earn this recognition. And I want to just spend a little bit on why the recognition is important. You know, it's not just enough to have a green lease. That in and of itself is a lot of work, but it's really important to tell everybody that you have a green lease. It wasn't believed when we were starting out with green leasing that this was even possible. People literally thought this could not be, but IMT showed it was possible, and then we had an inaugural class of green lease leaders that did it. I mean, I was hearing like third-hand reports of, you know, of broker panels at whatever conferences that they go to by themselves, of people saying green leasing isn't possible, and then somebody raising their hand from the audience and saying, but the Institute of Market Transformation just recognize all these landlords that are doing it. I mean, it was life-changing 4 years ago. I mean, when we first did this, we were earning, you know, the Motley Fool was covering it. I mean, all these major publications. It's gotten more media coverage than almost anything I've ever done at Kilroy. And that's because it really wasn't believed that you could have an energy-aligned lease. And we, through applying for recognition, has shown it is. So I just really want to encourage that. Next slide. And finally, I'm just going to leave you, I want to make sure we have time for questions, but just wanted to give you some advice for those who are thinking about green leasing. We have benchmarking ordinances now throughout the country. If you have any buildings in your portfolio at all, not all of them have to be subject, but if even one is subject to a benchmarking ordinance, this is a great way to start the conversation on green leasing with legal. You know, every lease says that tenants have to comply with laws. So yes, you can get through to utility disclosure that way. But this is a really good way to say, hey, listen, there are benchmarking ordinances. There could be fines or other, you know, bad press if we don't comply. We really need this language in there. And that can really help people who are reticent to incorporate new language. And the other thing is, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't make up green leasing by yourself. Don't just try to, you know, take the IMT, you know, okay, we need this, you know, capital recovery and this other thing and try to make it up. Please go to the library, find out what other people have done. There's a lot of work done on this already. Definitely leverage that. The other thing is a template. So the way that our green leases started, other than the capital recovery language, was that I kept asking for all of this one-off information to be put in our leases to comply with various LEED certification requirements that always seem to be like whack-a-mole, like they're always changing. Like in one, they needed a lighting power density, and another one you had to talk about green cleaning. It was, you know, it never seemed to be consistent. And we were going through a lease standards process, and that team reached out to me and said, hey, look, you're causing us all these headaches with all this one-off requests for lease clauses. We're standardizing the lease anyway. Give us everything you need and we'll get it in there. And that has been great, because then I don't have to chase down individual deals that I know are happening to make sure the language stays. The language is always in there from the get-go. And then obviously it's subject to negotiation, but at least it's there from the start. The next thing is adding a few softballs like the green cleaning language. You want to show that these things are not always onerous for the tenants and in fact can benefit them. And adding a couple things that are gimmies, I think is really crucial to getting a green lease signed. Another thing is definitely focus on the building standards. It's not just the lease. Jessica made that really clear. She has so much other information besides the lease that really gets this done. I have really, really strict building standards. And yes, we can negotiate over those. But I would say the real teeth of what we do in green leasing is often in the building standards. So just make sure you know that there are other documents out there besides just the lease itself that can really help you engage your tenants on sustainability. Engaging your brokers is good. A lot of them will just strike all this language because they don't understand it. Explain what you're doing. Explain why. Do that up front because you would be surprised how few tenant brokers understand green leases. I won't say who it is, but we have a very sustainability-focused technology tenant. And when we signed our green lease with them, they said, which is our standard green lease, there was nothing that weird in it, but they said, oh my gosh, this was the first green lease we'd ever seen. And our brokers wanted to strike all the information out. And we had to say, we had to have meetings and huddles internally to say, no, this is aligned with our corporate values. Don't assume that even a sustainability-focused tenant has a leasing team that understands this. They need to be talked to in advance about it. Prepare for pushback. There are some things that are going to get struck that you have to fight for, especially utility disclosure. That's the thing I found is the most problematic. And as I explained earlier, please apply for recognition through the Green Lease Leaders program. Send out press releases, tweet about it. It really moves the industry really, really quickly when we make public what we do in these very sort of private confidential documents. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Cindy and Alex for questions.
Thanks, Sarah. That was a really great overview of steps that anyone can take to green their lease. There have been a few questions that have come through on the chat. So I'll start with the first one, and anyone can answer this one, but it's a great foundational green leasing question. They'd like to understand if green leases are a specific lease agreement or elements of any lease that build the foundation for greener facilities.
I think Alex is probably answered. Yeah, you answer that.
Yeah, no, I think the asker got it right. It's the second part. So a green lease is not necessarily just one clause or one piece of the lease, but it's a communication tool to get energy aligned agreements into the lease.
Yeah, it has prerequisites, but there's more to it than just capital recovery, for example.
Yeah, and I think Sarah mentioned at the end there about our program, a lot of the credits we actually achieved outside of the lease. So our tenant fit-out guidelines, our building maintenance programs, a lot of the sustainability program features were actually what we submitted as our documentation to demonstrate compliance with the Green Lease Leaders requirements.
Thanks, Jessica. The next question is for you, actually. It's about the sustainability fit-out guidelines. The person asking wanted to know if they're different from key green leasing clauses, or are they the same? So what's in the guidelines? Is it
yeah,
the same?
and Alex, as the author of this, please feel free to chime in as well. But yeah, it is different than the green leasing clauses. So the green leasing clauses are really just like outlining in the lease the legal requirements to comply with certain sustainability initiatives. The tenant fit-out guidelines really tries to go through and outline how to prioritize energy management, water conservation, occupant health and wellness. So really outlining kind of measures that can be taken in the fit-out and design process.
And to reiterate, the fit-out guidelines really give tips and strategies on how to include energy management, health and wellness, recycling best practices into a space as a tenant is moving in. Sarah, one question came in for you related to how do you handle renewals, specifically existing space and a client that does not want to make any improvements. In other words, does a client going through a renewal have to update lighting if they are just extending the lease and have no intention of making improvements?
They don't, is the short answer to your question, unless they are, for whatever other reason, touching a certain percentage of the lights in their space. And then that would trigger them to have to retrofit all of the lights in our space. I find the tenants are pretty savvy and clever about that kind of thing. I will say that the other thing that we do for tenants that are reticent, I find a lot of this is just a budgeting issue that is solvable. So, for example, we had a triple net tenant up in Seattle, and one of my favorite property managers kept on them about, like, why aren't you retrofitting your lights? Why aren't you retrofitting your lights? And they kept saying, well, we don't want to, we don't, and basically it came down to the fact that they just didn't have a budget for it. I mean, lights can be expensive. And she was like, what if I just bought the lights for you and then I charge you back in the common area maintenance? And they're like, oh, that would be great. We have the budget to pay common area maintenance charges. And so that's what they did. So there are ways around it, but no, we can't force a tenant to do a retrofit. We try to have education. We try to have a lot of gentle reminders. And if they're trying to do something crazy with their space and are trying to skirt sustainability stuff, my team will smack that down. But if they are keeping their retrofit of their space small in order to avoid these requirements, there's not that much you can do about it.
Jessica, do you have anything to add about how you all handle renewals?
Yeah, I think that, I'm on the same page as Sarah as far as, we can't require anyone to do anything. A lot of the times the tenant is driving the conversation a lot of the time. But what I like to do is just, emphasize that sustainability is a win-win, and encourage our teams to use the renewal time to evaluate if there's something we're trying to accomplish in the building, such as, deploying LED lighting throughout the building. Is there an opportunity for us to achieve our goals and maybe do something outside of the TI at that time? But yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it is when it comes to renewals, and the deal getting done is the priority.
Thanks, Jessica. I think we have time for one more question. So Cindy, I just wanted to kick it over to you to see if you had anything to add related to timeline for Green Lease Leaders or anything that anyone should keep out for on the Green Lease Leaders website.
Yeah, sure. So I think we had a slide up earlier, but applications for the next cohort of Green Lease Leaders in 2019 are open through March 31st. We will accept and review at a rolling basis. So if you feel like you're ready to get started sooner than that March 31st deadline, we're happy to start processing that. If you're not sure if you're ready to be recognized through Green Lease Leaders this year, we also have a green leasing checklist that we've developed for both landlords and tenants that has about 8 questions about your current leasing practices that can sort of give you feedback about where you are in sort of your current lease practices. And we're happy to send that out to any interested parties that want to sort of assess where they are in sort of relation to being a green lease leader. So please reach out to Alex from IMT or myself from DOE to get access to that checklist or to ask any other questions.
And Cindy, can I just add that for those who are members of BOMA, BOMA has a green lease Bible. It's so big because I was one of the people who worked on it. It's not free, but if you happen to be a BOMA member and you want really actual lease language, every possible iteration of any possible green leasing term is in this like sample lease that you can get through BOMA. So for those of you who are members and are embarking on this for the first time, that might be a good resource for you. Otherwise, definitely for the way easier to digest version, please go to the resources Cindy was talking about.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for everyone's time this afternoon. I hope everyone learned about green leasing and green lease leaders. And more importantly, I hope you all are encouraged to apply. You know, as was stated earlier, if you have any questions about green leasing, you know, please reach out to myself or Cindy. We'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks to our great presenters, Jessica and Sarah, for your time this afternoon. Your stories, I really hope, inspire the audience to apply, and I hope to read through some of the applications pretty soon. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.